Are you all set?
I think we're ready to go, Akinya. So whenever you're ready, we can start. So.
Oh, okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. This is Akinyi, Yureli Akinyi. So I'll be moderating today's event, which is conducted by the Ramphal Institute, the Department of Economy and International Trade. And with me in this event are Dr. Jan Ves and Dr. Brendan Vickers and San Mbakalu. So just to give you a brief bio of the panelists, Dr. Yanivas is an international trade lawyer who, over the course of her 15-year practice, has advised governments and private stakeholders on international trade matters with a focus on litigating disputes under the auspices of the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. Dr. Remy holds an undergraduate degree in law from the University of West Indies, a master's from the University of Cambridge, and a PhD, summa cum laude, from the Graduate Institute of Development Studies on the role of Caribbean Court of Justice in Caribbean Integration. Dr. Remy is also the Deputy Director of Sridhar Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services, the premier trade institution of the University of West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados, dedicated to training, research, and outreach on issues of regional and international trade. She also lectures in the SRC's flagship Masters in International Trade Policy program in the areas of international trade law and e-commerce, and conducts outreach and research on behalf of the center. She also holds the position of the WTO chair at the University of West Indies under the WTO's chair program. She previously worked as a senior associate at Sidley Austin LLP in Geneva and Washington, DC, and before that as a legal officer at the appellate body of the WTO. Our second panelist, Dr. Vickers, is the head of the International Trade Policy section at the Commonwealth Secretariat, having previously been an economic advisor in the section. Prior to joining the Commonwealth, he worked in the South African Civil Services as head of research and policy at the Department of Trade and Industry and Deputy Director for International Relations and Trade in the Office of the President, Thabo Mbeki. He also worked in the NGO sector as Program Director at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Dr. Vickers has published widely on trade and development issues and had been part of the team that drafted 3 editions of the Secretariat's flagship trade report, the Commonwealth Trade Review in 2015, 2018, and this year, 2021. He holds a PhD from the University of London. And our third panelist, Sant Mbakalu, is an international trade and investment expert for the African market with over 15 years of professional experience, working in a complex multicultural environment in international trade and investment. He is the current executive director at Africa International Trade and Commerce Research, founder International Trade and Research Center, which is an independent not-for-profit think tank. He's also a member of board of directors, Smile Africa Trust, technical committee member, Trade Working Group of National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable, and also a member of Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also a honorary member of Organization of Women in International Trade in Nigeria, and also a convener of Nigeria International Trade and Investment Conference. He has played a lead role in business development, conference and keynote presentation, consultancy and research. He's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Cape Town, Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance, South Africa, and an enthusiast of Formula One motorsports. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, our panelists have very rich professional portfolio. And just to give us some background of what we'll be discussing today, the Ramphal Institute, through its Department of International Trade and Economics, decided to conduct a webinar series on trade and economic related issues in the Commonwealth specifically. So for the first series, we'll be handling, or rather discussing, the matters to do with trade policy in the new international economic landscape from a Commonwealth perspective. And as you will see from the find out from the discussions, is that Dr. Yanves will give us a background of trade policy issues, especially from the Caribbean perspective. And Mbakalu will give us from the African perspective, and Dr. Vickers will give us a general outlook, trade policy issues generally from a Commonwealth perspective. So just to kick us off, I'll start with Dr. Vickers, and then from that, the rest will follow. So, from to you, Dr. Vickers, how and what are the various pathways for post-pandemic recovery in the Commonwealth, and what are some of the ways in which countries in the Commonwealth can access and harness these new digital and other technologies to boost trade and investment and transform the prospect for a sustainable development? Over to you, Dr. Vickers.
Thank you, Akinyi. It's a great pleasure to be here today with this seminar. I have prepared just a couple of slides just to give a bit of visuals and backgrounds in response to your answer. The challenge is to share it. And that should be it. It's working?
Sure, it is. Go ahead.
Great stuff. So in response to your questions, I want to draw on some of the findings from our forthcoming Commonwealth Trade Review, which you alluded to in the introduction, and which I've been part of the team that drafted that. It's called Energizing Commonwealth Trade in a Digital World, Path to Recovery Post-COVID. And so these are going to be some of the preliminary findings. The main launch of the report and the full findings will be held on the 12th of July. But I think, the overall message, as we all know very well, is that COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented global economic crisis, which has significantly affected Commonwealth countries' trade and investment. And this really has implications for the long-term vision of growing intra-Commonwealth trade to around $2 trillion by 2030, which is the vision which our heads espoused in 2018 at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting with the adoption of a Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda. And I think it's also significant because the Commonwealth isn't a trading bloc in the formal sense, like we'll hear from around CARICOM or the African Continental Free Trade Area, for instance. That notwithstanding, there are some inherent trade advantages, which we've spoken about since 2015, what we call the Commonwealth Trade Advantage. And we're really hopeful that this Commonwealth Trade Advantage will provide a post-pandemic tailwind, if you like, to assist countries with their recovery and to build resilience going forward. What we mean by this, if we look at since we first published the 2015 Commonwealth Trade Review and with the forthcoming 2021 Trade Review, certain things stand out. The first is that Commonwealth countries tend to trade more with each other than with non-Commonwealth countries. In fact, trade is around 20% more than otherwise. We also see that the amount of investment that takes place between Commonwealth countries has almost tripled since 2015 and stands at around 27% more than otherwise, and this is particularly pronounced in Africa. So Sandia, this is really interesting for your area of work, where obviously many Commonwealth countries are large investors in other Commonwealth countries. So that's 27% more. And we've also seen that bilateral trade costs are 21% lower. So these all provide opportunities to support recovery from the pandemic. But we also know, and these are the trends outlined in our forthcoming trade review, is that recovery will unfold in tandem with several pre-pandemic trends, which we have seen starting to emerge. The reconfiguration of supply chains, Industry 4.0, digitalization, as well as other factors that will contribute, particularly in Africa and South Asia, rapid urbanization, increasingly economic, environmental, social, and governance considerations in FDI decisions, greater attention to more sustainable trade, greening of supply chains, and more circular economy principles in practice. So this is all very important for us. So before we get to some of these solutions, just to give you a bit of a sketch of how did Commonwealth trade look like in 2019 before the pandemic. And you can see here that the total value of the Commonwealth countries' global exports of goods and services combined was just over 3.7 trillion in 2019. Intra-Commonwealth trade in the same year was 673 billion. Generally, 2/3 of Commonwealth's world trade as well as intra-Commonwealth trade is in goods, 1/3 is in services. And the pattern is replicated if we look at who are the major exporters of goods. Those are the developing countries, and the largest exporters of services are the developed economies, but that gap is narrowly closing very fast. Overall, the Commonwealth exports are worth around 15% of global trade, but significant for many of the smaller Commonwealth countries. So our Commonwealth small states especially depend the most on Commonwealth markets. Intra-Commonwealth trade is valued at around 28% of their world exports, so quite significant for them. If we look at what was the impact on this trade in 2020, the calculations in our trade review show these four big numbers, and it's really striking that there was a drop of $1.15 trillion in the Commonwealth countries' combined GDP, negative GDP growth in 45 Commonwealth countries. This is significant. Only about half of that amount of countries went into recession after the global financial crisis. We've calculated that if the pandemic had not happened, the Commonwealth's world trade would have been as much as $345 billion higher. And that includes about an export loss of 60 billion for intra-Commonwealth trade. And that's quite a significant knock, given that trade among Commonwealth countries is highly concentrated among around a handful of large exporters. Most significantly, I think, in terms of the vulnerability to the pandemic and its impact has been the services sector. Two things to observe on this sheet. You'll see the first is the share of goods and services in the world and in intra-Commonwealth. You'll see that services, the blue part of the box, is around just 36%. And that's significantly higher than the global average of around 25%. So Commonwealth countries trade more services among themselves than the global average. And within that, travel accounts for around 30%. So we all know that travel and tourism was heavily impacted, and we hear more about that from Jean-Yves. That particularly our Caribbean and Pacific small island developing states were relatively more impacted because of the contraction and in global tourism. On the other side is really interesting, something we've been thinking about conceptually and practically. How does COVID-19 impact on services trade? Because we all know that services generally involves in-person interaction. If you think about the various modes of supply envisaged under the General Agreement on Trade in Services, there's 4 modes of supply. Mode 1 is cross-border supply. That's generally by electronic or digital means. Mode 2 is consumption abroad. That's when a consumer actually needs to travel abroad to obtain the service. So we're thinking here particularly about education, healthcare, tourism. Mode 3 is commercial presence. That's when an affiliate of a foreign company opens up a branch or store, and those are the profits and the sales from that enterprise. Mode 4 is the movement of natural persons, often to deliver a temporary service. In particular, this is prevalent in ICT. So these 2 arrows really show that due to the pandemic, there has been an increase in online engagement, which does not really require in-person interaction, and a decrease in in-person interaction. We can all understand why, because of the social restrictions put in place and the restrictions on movement and so forth. And I think this is really interesting. What does this mean, cross-border supply? Increasingly, all kinds of services can be delivered online. They become tradable in many ways. All countries can participate in the value chains that go into supporting broader processes, including manufacturing. So this is something for us to think about. So in response to your question, in this trade review, we believe there's a multiple tracks of post-COVID recovery, depending on each country's unique circumstances, the composition of their exports, the structure of the economy, their unique vulnerabilities that they face. But we set out around 10 in this way, which would be the policy areas for revitalizing Commonwealth trade. The first is the need to strengthen and reform the multilateral trading system. This is so important given that the rules-based multilateral trading system provides the optimal framework for a post-COVID recovery. And the biggest challenge here, as Jean-Yves knows well, is the appellate body and how we get a more functional dispute settlement system, but also the need to make progress on particular issues that have been long outstanding. Fisheries subsidies, extremely important, long overdue. Hopefully members of the WTO will reach an agreement by November, December with MC12, but also other reforms that are needed. Second, we need to boost regional trade and cooperation. We know that when Commonwealth countries belong to a regional trade agreement, the econometric evidence shows that they trade almost 3 times more in the exports. So existing agreements like the African Continental Trade Agreement, recently signed agreements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, rafts of other agreements, many of them existing, but having huge implementation deficits. This is where we need to focus on. We need to boost regional trade and cooperation. Third, we need to utilize new trading opportunities post-Brexit. We feel that there's many opportunities here, particularly when it comes to services and also making improvements on the European Union's former trade regime that applied in the UK. We can come back to that later. Fourth is to revive the tourism and travel sector. We actually have a ministerial roundtable on this exact topic tomorrow, focusing specifically on small states. Fifth is to enhance support measures to least developed countries and graduates. This is looking ahead of the UN LDC 5 summit that is taking place in Doha in January next year. And there must be ways to improve how we support least developed countries, particularly taking these pre-pandemic trends into mind, and particularly digitization. We know there's a huge digital divide between countries and within countries, and we need to try to close and bridge that. With that in mind, we need to delve further into this, to leverage digital technologies for trade, development, and competitiveness. And this could take various aspects around capacity building, improving the regulatory framework. Think of all the data privacy, the cybersecurity, the consumer laws, payment systems, everything that is necessary for an effective system of e-commerce and the online delivery of certain services. We've called for a reinvigorated and additionally funded aid for digital trade, really to assist micro, small, and medium enterprises, women-led businesses, youth entrepreneurs, to build the skills and to break into markets, whether it's local, regional, or international. And the fourth one is partnerships, really to take advantage of savvy entrepreneurs, savvy tech startups. Let's see how we can use fintech, particularly, to extend financial inclusion to those that are unbanked, but also to find new ways of easing trade, including through paperless trade, for instance. And overarching this really is the importance of promoting trade and more circular economy principles to build back better. This is my final slide, just to show that we are expecting intra-Commonwealth trade to recover. We are expecting intra-Commonwealth trade to surpass 700 billion by 2022, especially if initiatives like the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda and business platforms will assist. So we've just thought of some drivers of trade growth for Commonwealth. Most importantly is the vaccination drive. Everything today revolves around vaccinations, opening up economies, trade policies, vaccination policy, economic policies, vaccination policy, and we need to ensure greater access, more equitable access, affordable access to vaccinations for those who want it, and to support our frontline healthcare workers. This is so important in the tourism industry, for instance. The safe reopening of tourism, requires travelers to be confident that where they are going, they will be safe, and also to provide confidence to those employed in the tourism sector that they will be safe in their working conditions. The second is the Commonwealth Advantage. We've shown that it's been compelling, it remains strong, it remains resilient. Can countries use this advantage as a post-pandemic tailwind? Implementation of the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda and its various working groups and action groups, in the various clusters, that will be so important to support recovery. We have even the Commonwealth Blue Charter for more sustainable recovery. Look at the oceans economy and the blue economy. We have a sustainable energy transition agenda, very important for a more sustainable future. Third is to connect business. There are various platforms within the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is the world's ultimate network of networks. There is the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. There's the Commonwealth Alliance of Young Entrepreneurs. There's the Intra-Commonwealth SME Network. Many ways of matching up suppliers and traders and investors. Fifth, we need to provide our members with policy support, particularly, as you said, Akinyi, for the digital world, right? How do we ensure that they are prepared to engage in e-commerce? How do we ensure that the infrastructure is in place? How do we ensure that everyone has the workforce skills? How do we also provide social support measures, and skills and training? So this is really a vital area of work going forward, is equipping our member countries to participate in and benefit from a more digital world. I've mentioned the importance of new RTAs, including there we have the Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the UK and the EU. That poses some challenges to our member countries, but hopefully through dialogue this can be overcome. Multilateral cooperation, I've stressed. The upsurge in digitalization is so important. We saw that during the initial year of the pandemic, the number of people worldwide using the internet went up by 7.3%, or an additional 316 million people. So global access today is around 58.1% of the world's population. The Commonwealth, our access of our citizens doubled in the decade to 2019. So, our citizens have, the Commonwealth's access is around 48%, just over 48%. So still below the global average, but having made significant strides over that past decade. And then the last is just, around the demography and youth. There's a lot of evidence and literature that shows that countries, regions that are more youthful, more dynamic, Asia, Africa, these are likely to rebound faster. And if we look at the Commonwealth, almost 60% of our population is under the age of 30 years. So a vibrant resource to tap into. So I'm going to leave it at that and come back to some of the issues in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vickers. That was very insightful. So just to summarize what you've said, to ensure that we are all on the same page. So you've given us some of the drivers of trade. Some of the drivers of trade growth should be vaccination, ensuring that everyone is vaccinated, at least majority of the population are vaccinated, and also taking advantage of the Commonwealth Advantage. And thirdly, policy support. And you've given us a summary of some of the policy areas which can be used to for vitalizing Commonwealth Advantage, the Commonwealth trade, and that includes strengthening and reforming multilateral trade, boosting regional trade and cooperation, and third, reviving tourism and the travel sector. Fourth, utilizing new trade opportunities post-Brexit, and among others. And finally, fintech taking advantage of fintech to enhance access to capital and financial inclusion. Thank you very much for that particular presentation. And as we move to our second panelist, Sand Mbakalu. So what are some of the various policy interventions that can be put in place, especially from a CAFTA perspective, that is the African Continental Free Trade Area, in order to put CAFTA at the core of policy, at the core of the policies for strategic outcomes, that is by the CAFTA African members? San Bakalu, are you in?
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me and for the question. I have just few slides really, but I'm going to just in order to respond to your question, which I think is timely. So I will just share my slide to just bring us to speed where we are when it comes to Commonwealth and Africa, as it were. So let me see. Okay. Okay. So I've basically let's start it this way. AFCFTA and the Commonwealth. Currently, Commonwealth have about 19 countries that are Africans. That are members of Commonwealth, that as well as AFCFTA, that is the Africa. So within these 19 countries, we have the big economy, which is Nigeria and South Africa. We have the smallest economy, we have the poorest. So there are three, basically, if you have to categorize the countries that are made up of members of Commonwealth and currently AFCFTA. These are the three groups. And these 19 countries have over the years not been able to trade with themselves, even why Dr. Brenda presented that Commonwealth members have 20% chances of trading with one another. But I don't think that has been the case with African countries that are members of Commonwealth. We've not been able to trade with ourselves that much. A classical case is the inter-trade relationship between Nigeria and Rwanda. Very minimum inter-trade between even Uganda and Rwanda. They're having some challenges in the area of trade. And basically, with the new international economic landscape, this has to change. And I believe that is where the AFCFTA has come in to address. The AFCFTA have come in to be able to set a template for Africa to trade with themselves. But however, the Commonwealth Secretariat has a role to play to ensure African members that are Commonwealth, African countries that are members of Commonwealth trade more with themselves. And there are things they need to do, that is offering some technical support. We're not saying you should neglect other African countries, but we're talking about a friendship or as an association that is almost 70 years old. That is the Commonwealth. It's basically the oldest, and these are people coming voluntarily, even while most of them have some tie with the British Empire. But having said that, these countries are genuinely interested in their membership as Commonwealth. So Commonwealth has to pay a special attention to them. And I'm glad that the UK bilateral agreement with Ghana, with Kenya is ongoing. But even while the people still have some concern on that, but I think it's ongoing things that can be amended. So AFCFTA has given us this platform where I think Commonwealth should leverage on to ensure the state parties that are Commonwealth members, 19 of them, trade more with themselves. By extension, it gives the third party that are Commonwealth members opportunity to trade by building regional value chain, because it's easy for us to be able to trade with the Caribbean that are not members of AFCFTA. Well, let's just put it into context. We're talking about an African market that has 1.2 billion market, 1.2 billion. These are 1.2 billion people that are fragmented, but this time around, we're going to be taking away all the barriers, the tariff barriers and the non-tariff barriers. But, this gives a massive opportunity. It should not be about Canada, it should not be about Australia that are members of Commonwealth, but we should look into ensuring that these countries that have been classified as poor, you recall that the poorest, the poverty index has Nigeria as one of the poorest country, has the poorest population. So these are members of the Commonwealth. So Commonwealth has to pay attention. And I believe trade is the only instrument that can help elevate and eradicate poverty. Inclusive trade is one of those tools as well. In Africa as well, we know Africa is known over the years as commodity continent, supplying the world with commodity. And majority, as I've mentioned, majority of these countries are members of the Commonwealth. Whereas what we're expecting that going forward, change, considering the current economic landscape that has changed due to COVID-19, which we all agree that Africa, even while the mortality, the death rate is not high in Africa, but the economy has been badly hit by COVID-19. So what we are saying is Commonwealth should make deliberate effort in ensuring that these raw materials have value while there is still raw material being exported that goes outside, that goes from Africa, but value should be added. This creates wealth, this eliminates poverty, this brings inclusive growth, and as well as empower women in order, which are the most times the hard hit when it comes to these issues of poverty. So if it has started. We're already in the season of this of trade, under Commonwealth. Under AFCFTA, it kickstarts. This started the operation in this January 2021. It's still early stage. So many things have been negotiated. Things have not balanced. The framework have been put in place, and that is where Commonwealth comes in to give this technical assistance to support the system so that especially member states, can be able to leverage on this. By the way, this agreement has a sunset clause where people can leave after 5 years if they're not happy with the agreement. Basically, the new landscape is this: Commonwealth can't talk about trade in Africa without playing a lead role under AFCFTA. It's as simple as that. We know Commonwealth is not focused on trade, but I appreciate what Dr. Brenda said, that now they are refocusing and focusing on trade and investment. It's very, very important, especially with the current disruption that has been caused by COVID-19, which the ripple effect, we are still feeling it. The unemployment has skyrocketed. The youth population needs to be engaged. And how do we engage this youth population? By putting the necessary policies in place that will take care of them. So my recommendation is this: Commonwealth and African trade. First, the Commonwealth should focus on creating an enabling environment for members in the entirety, especially in Africa. They should support members with technical assistance. And I use the opportunity to appeal to member states that are somehow stepping down or withholding funds for technical assistance. We should look beyond especially when it comes to funding the secretary. We should look beyond some things that have internal processes in the Commonwealth. Let's look at the member states. People are suffering if that does, because that is where Commonwealth is secretary itself fund development, because that is the development and the Commonwealth should also encourage members to deepen the regional value chains by supporting them through national capacity building for exports. They should also support members. Most member countries in Africa have weak legislative framework. Commonwealth Secretary should support members in creating an enabling environment to implement this. This is an opportunity for them. SMEs and digital economy, digitalization and e-commerce is a big thing. I believe Commonwealth should make endeavor to be able to support African countries in this area. And basically, this is my submission. While I wait for us to engage further on this area of discussion, but I believe this is we're on the right foot. And on that note, I open the floor for the panel, for the moderator to call in the next panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, San Bakalu. So what I've learned from your presentation is that there are 19 African Commonwealth countries, and however, those intra-African trade is still quite low, and it can always improve. And so CAFTA comes in to save the situation by encouraging African countries, the members of CAFTA, to trade with one another. And therefore, the opportunities that CAFTA presents for its members are that it will encourage trade activities by removing tariffs of over 90%, and also trying to ensure that they're eliminating non-tariff barriers. And it is quite interesting that in the areas of non-tariff barriers, it is one of the is one of the major inhibiting factors to intra-African trade, especially on issues to do with sanitary and phytosanitary measures, issues to do with basically the regulatory framework that most of these African countries are not able to adhere to. That's therefore inhibiting trade, intra-African trade. And therefore, the advice that you're trying to propose is that between for Commonwealth and Africa, is that Commonwealth should, the Commonwealth at large should focus on creating an enabling environment for its members and to offer technical assistance, especially to the low economies, to the small economies in its membership. And just to move, thank you very much for that presentation. And I believe we'll engage more on that after the presentation by Dr. Yanivest. So Dr. Yanivest, especially from a Commonwealth Caribbean perspective, to what extent can trade policy aid post-COVID-19 economic recovery? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to the Srinath Institute, Ramphal Institute, which is sort of the Commonwealth version of what we have here, the Srinath Ramphal Center in the Caribbean, for the invitation to speak. I'm always supportive of young researchers like yourself, Akini, doing this kind of work. So pleased to be part of this panel. I'm afraid that what I'm going to say is sort of a variation of the same theme the previous speakers have kind of already canvassed, because I think the issue is not so much the solutions. I think for each of the regions, the solutions remain the same. The problem is to find the means and to be engineering creatively the solution. So let me just take a step back before I launch into the Caribbean perspective. And when I looked at the question or the theme for today, which is what should the emphasis for trade policy in the new international economic landscape be, I remembered somehow this reference to the new international economic. It's sort of the start of and is reminiscent of a time when many Commonwealth countries, including those of the Caribbean, were seeking to establish this new international economic order. Shortly in the 1970s, shortly after many had achieved independence, were seeking to carve out an economic landscape in the world that was much more of their own image and likeness. This assertion of permanent sovereignty over their own resources, patrimony, and development. Fast forward these 50 or so years, and we live in a very different age now, where the buzzword is not so much self-determination as it is this concept of a shared worldview, inclusiveness, sustainability, and globalization. Not so much about exploiting your own physical resources for your own good, but this idea of the global commons, being mindful that what you do inevitably affects your neighbor. So climate change and these other huge looming threats are not geographically confined problems, and actually they affect you, even if in the instance of the small Caribbean islands, you are not responsible in many cases for it. So the poor countries, many of which are the small states in the Commonwealth, remain the wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon would have said. I don't want to start my remarks with this picture of gloom and doom and unfairness in the international economic order, but that the truth for many of us, including in the Caribbean, is that this is a very, very perilous time in our existence. And I have not even mentioned to you the other C word yet, which is COVID-19. So to remind those of you who may not know from my accent, I am from the Caribbean, and our trade and economic circumstances is woeful. We fall predominantly within the Commonwealth Secretariat's categories of small states and even more specifically, small vulnerable states based on indices of economic, social, and environmental vulnerabilities based on work that the Commonwealth Secretariat itself has championed. We, however, in the Caribbean present something of a conundrum because at one and the same time, we are doing well on traditional metrics of performance like GDP per capita. Some of our islands rank among high income countries on the World Bank criteria. And our islands are still, for many, considered to be these rich tax havens or idyllic vacation spots where the rich holiday and stash away their money. This reality of the Caribbean is hard to juxtapose next to our actual situation, in which we are still very much monocrop, monofocal economies. Most of us are service dependents, and just a few like Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago have oil dependence. We are poorly invested in, very susceptible to wipeout, risks from natural disasters, and long-term annihilation due to climate change. We are poorly connected into global value chains. We are non-diversified. We are non-competitive, and we are highly indebted. 12 of the 20 Caribbean economies for which data is available have government debt to GDP ratios of over 60%, and 4 have debt to GDP in excess of 100%. So this is the sort of the circumstance against which we have to consider what would be an appropriate trade policy for the region. Added to that, the fact that we have an anemic regional integration process which shows little signs of growth and resuscitation, although we sometimes face some injections of energy, nothing in the scale of the AFCFTA. So the truth is that we have not concocted a regional-wide trade policy in the fashion of Africa or the EU or China or the UK even, and we are largely responsive to trade impacts. So in this sort of circumstance that I'm painting for you, the solutions for our economies are laced with challenges. But I still think it is a hopeful moment for us. And in a piece that I co-authored with 2 of the trade researchers at the SRC entitled Trading Our Way to Recovery During the COVID-19 Pandemic, and I say during because this COVID pandemic is here with us for a little while, we decided to focus on a couple of key sectors that we believe represent at least the greatest hope for trade policy around which our region can pivot. And as I said, the themes I'm going to bring up are not new. They've been already broached by Dr. Vickers and Mr. Sand. The first is to reclaim our regional industrial policy, which sets the tone for other policies. And in my view, this has to be government and private sector led and supported. The international trade disruptions in food and medical supply sectors must challenge our region to at least explore its productivity in new areas. In the piece we co-authored, we recommend policies to develop local regional productive capacity in tandem with export markets. That translates into incentivizing local production and buying more local, but also improving the regional coordination of standards, improving our woeful transportation links, and trade facilitation. Outside of food security, which is a main problem in this region, and I'm sure in Africa as well, the first sides of innovative solutions like domestic production of medical equipment occurred during COVID. We had alcohol and hand sanitizing by regional rum distilleries and mass created by the domestic industry, which developed overnight. And these are encouraging signs that the region needs to invest more in research and development. But to stop here, just in terms of the manufacturing capacity of the region, would be short sighted. What are the new green, literally green pastures for us to pursue that will unlock new potential, get us out of the chronic debt that I described, and allow us to move into more viable sectors, as well as think about how to resuscitate the old ones? So, using digital platforms to reimagine our hugely dependent sector of tourism is one idea. Renewing and investing our interest in the blue economy, which is much more expansive. Our islands are actually within a Caribbean Sea lashed by the Atlantic Ocean, and there are numerous examples of ways we can sustainably exploit that resource to our benefit. And government should not do this alone. We need to encourage new kinds of sustainable investors into our region. We see a lot of them flocking to Africa because of the economies of scale there. But is there a way to encourage these types of investors into the Caribbean so that we can stop depending on government for all of the funding of our social programming and really move into new types of foreign direct investment that the Caribbean has not so far attracted? Our traditional attracted sectors are tourism in the old vein, but how do we bring in these new types of investments that will secure a return on the investor, but be attractive also for the private sector in the Caribbean as well as internationally? I also want to think about the digital economy anew. So these digital platforms, getting more of our MSMEs into e-commerce, creating payment systems where the value remains in the Caribbean. So instead of using these external platforms where a percentage of the transaction is kept by the Amazons and the PayPals and all of these other platforms that ultimately are providing a service, but where the value is not being kept in the region. Upskilling so that our young people and our old people can focus on different types of education opportunities, technical vocation skills, indigenizing our software industry so that whilst we spend over $100 million every year in the Caribbean to get external providers to come and provide software, we can teach our young people, supported by these external platform providers, to do it ourselves. And finally, leveraging our trade agreements, including the one within our region, CARICOM, so we can think more about using the mechanisms at our disposal to create more trade opportunities with our partners. And I know mention was made of the UK CARIFORUM agreement, which is basically in the model of the EU CARIFORUM agreement, but really re-energizing it in the new areas that I just described. One of the surprising and immediate response to COVID that I want to mention was how easily people moved across different countries. So we needed nurses from Cuba and doctors from Cuba. We finally were able to put on wheels this idea of a Caribbean African relationship by bringing Ghanaian nurses into the region. These were things that were previously just spoken about, but utilizing these trade agreements to really allow free movement of persons under the free movement of services sorts of connections is really made possible in times of emergency. I want to end with some closing notes about how we can be more strategic in our relationships, bearing in mind the Commonwealth of which we form a broader part. What I haven't presented so much is the ideas on how to maneuver the landscape through advocacy and trade negotiations. I think Brendan mentioned utilizing and reinvigorating the multilateral trade system. But for this context, I want to think more about better utilizing the Commonwealth which Brendan has set the scene for why it makes economic sense to do it, and encourage more than just a friendly club of advocates and technical work, but a place where we actually go to negotiate new trading relationships. The Commonwealth Secretariat is already crunching the numbers for us. But I want to think about how we utilize the complementarities of our economies to actually negotiate some kind of bespoke agreement that will ensure that we don't need to utilize the old ways of doing things, but we utilize the new digital platforms for increasing trade, that we utilize the Commonwealth Secretariat for vaccination support. Some of the best places and earliest support we got in the Caribbean was from India, AstraZeneca from the UK and India alliance. These are opportunities staring us in the face that we should use the Commonwealth Secretariat to promote. And the final thing I want to say is that there is a new reality that we have to navigate carefully. There is a brewing Cold War. If anybody read the G7 out communiques with China and the West, which is exemplified by the new emphasis on countering the infrastructural assistance that China is providing and instead letting the West do it. In a recent column, one of the commentators who writes often about the Caribbean, David Jessup, he explained that by virtue of its location, smallness, and need for development, the Caribbean will continue to struggle to be the mistress of its own destiny unless it can achieve unity of purpose, new thinking, a clear vision, and real-time execution. The coming chill in relations between the West and China will make finding solutions to the problems of the region even more challenging. And my suggestion is that the Commonwealth Secretariat, we utilize that bonding institution to weather some of these storms, whether they are geopolitical in nature or economic in nature. I think there's a huge opportunity for the Commonwealth to be the place that unites us all. So I'll stop here, and I will be anxious to hear your reactions and questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remy. That was very wonderful. And I'm very glad that you brought up the issue of the G7, especially in the context of them recently, a few weeks ago, they proposed that the global corporate income tax be at least 15%. So, and given the post-COVID realities of the Commonwealth Caribbean, do you think that it is possible, given that most Commonwealth Caribbean countries are considered to be tax havens, the adverse implications of that, if they decide to raise their corporate tax to at least 15%, do you think that would adversely implicate the Commonwealth Caribbean countries?
So before I want to just say on the record that I'm not a tax expert, and I certainly have not studied this issue from all the angles that are necessary. I think the most problematic part of these types of endeavors, which are obviously well-intentioned, is that they proceed without the necessary consultation among those that will be most affected by some of the actions. And I started the presentation saying that a lot of people's minds, the Caribbean is just these places where the rich go to stash their cash without any proper due diligence and oversight. And we have been at the butt's end of a number of these initiatives, and we have fought them over and over again, primarily on the grounds that there are ways of doing these kinds of taking these unilateral actions that doesn't exclude, but involves countries who take the disproportionate burden of them. And we see that other countries are not similarly dealt with, even if they have similar practices. I think that part of the problem with the initiative, as I mentioned, I'm sure it's well-intentioned, is that it comes often as a surprise to those of us who are affected by it. So quite apart from the morality of it, which becomes a moral question, it's a process issue for many of these countries. I'll leave that there and see if others have other views to share. Thank you, Akinyi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remy. If to our participants, we're opening the floor to everyone now to participate. And if anyone has a question, please feel free to post it on the comment section, and we will ask it in time. So just to kick us off, Dr. Vickers, so Dr. Remy proposed that there should be that the Commonwealth Secretariat should come in a little bit more strongly to encourage, in a way to encourage intra-Commonwealth trade activities. And however, I think there has been some complacency from, especially from the UK side, and also the negative attitude that most of the recipients of the economic partnership agreement feel towards the negative attitude that they feel towards this agreement. So is there a way in which a balance can be created to ensure that post Brexit, is there a way to ensure that the EPAs, especially from the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, maximize the benefits of post Brexit, and also to create that balance between the EPAs and the African Continental Free Trade Area? I'm not sure if I'm clear.
Thanks for that question. We've tried to delve a little bit into it in our Commonwealth Trade Review, but I'll speak a bit broader as well around this. You know, we do feel that the UK outside of the EU does present new opportunities for the UK to implement its own trade policy and make improvements in a way on some of the EPAs. You know, so we, for example, already seen that a number of the challenges which developing countries have raised, the UK has tackled head on. For example, we know that citrus exports from South Africa, from Swaziland, have been subjected to more stringent sanitary and phytosanitary treatment, even though the UK is not a citrus producer. So we've seen measures that have been put in place to review and rescind some of those measures to, to reduce the trade tensions and frictions there. Similarly, we can look broad at other products, whether it's beef in the fishing industry, others, where we can overcome those challenges. I think there's an opportunity for the UK and Commonwealth countries to cooperate more on services. There's a waiver in the WTO to provide services preferences to least developed countries. We know that the UK has a very strong relationship with our least developed country members in the Commonwealth, and hopefully there's an opportunity there to examine how the UK can provide commercially meaningful preferences to least developed countries, not only in the Commonwealth, but those that all need them. We also know that the UK is a leading donor and advocate of aid for trade, right? And has really supported regional integration processes, particularly in Africa. So we think that's an opportunity that could be harnessed further. And this is something we'd like to think more about in terms of what we've called an enhanced or reinvigorated aid for digital trade initiative. I think, there's also the opportunity to use the Commonwealth as a platform to resolve, issues that have arisen post-Brexit. So, one of the biggest issues we currently see is triangular supply chains, particularly from the Caribbean, from Africa, where goods that come to the UK perhaps first have to transship through a European port or through Ireland, and this introduces a whole vexing set of new challenges which make many products uncompetitive. We've seen, for example, that the Maldives has one of the most sustainable fishing practices in the world, but the Maldives doesn't have a trade agreement with the UK, and so its fish exports attract most favored nation tariffs. We've seen concerns around the sugar exports from Fiji, from some of the Caribbean countries, and what we've heard from the UK is, an open invitation, an open door, bilaterally, or even, through some of our Commonwealth meetings and discussions to try to learn more about these problems and to tackle them head on in partnership with countries. We feel that particularly around issues like financial technology, This is, immense and considerable potential for the UK to cooperate and work with our Commonwealth developing countries to improve, their participation in fintech and the benefits that come from that. We've already seen, for example, the UK and Singapore propose a digital economy agreement. We've seen, the digital economy partnership agreement between, if I'm correct, it's New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile, and Canada has just joined that as well. So there's a lot of innovative ideas, coming around the Commonwealth, and I think there's an opportunity to use that. We've seen the UK's commitment to deepening and strengthening Commonwealth trade, particularly through the appointment of trade envoys, one particularly for the Caribbean region, the Commonwealth Caribbean. So I think, many opportunities, and we need to use this to, harness them and deepen our trade cooperation.
Akini, if I may, on what, if I may just comment on what Brendan just said.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the problem, Brendan, is that these are amazing opportunities that I don't even know about. So the UK-Singapore Digital Economy Partnership, I mean, it could be just that I'm not keeping abreast of it, but these are wonderful sort of initiatives that we need to find ways to bring into the public, consciousness, and raise at appropriate levels, in the media, as alternative ways of doing trade agreements, or more bespoke, as I said, trade agreements. So I think if the Commonwealth wanted to punch in this space, it has so much already taking place among these countries that it could probably be a model to the rest of the world. And I think it would be an opportunity for us to engage at different levels. I recently did a presentation to certain British officials visiting the Caribbean, and I put forward some of these ideas of fintech, the UK being the place, especially now that it's gone alone, that is doing so much in that space, and also investments, sustainable investment products. These are areas where England punches above its weight. Instead of the UK looking always to the US to do something, it's a model in a lot of ways that could present opportunities for the Commonwealth as well. And besides the UK, I mean, we have India, we have New Zealand, Canada. These are all sort of big developing or developed countries that we could also utilize to create a lot of these novel ways of doing free trade agreements. So I think it's an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remy, and Dr. Vickers as well. So, over to you, Mr. Sanbakadu.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. Thank you very much, Dr. Brenda, for that intervention. But I think I've been hearing about agreement and programs. I've not heard the issue of the private sector. We do, and that is the new way we have to do things. The new landscape is this: government is there to create the enabling environment, but the private sector has to be brought into the center of this agreement. Who implement this? Who invest? And on the Caribbean side, while we look at foreign direct investment, we always look at the West. I think the Caribbean countries, also using the Commonwealth platform, should look at Africa. Over the years, we've seen Africa middle class rising, and I appreciate the intervention of Ghana nurses coming to the Caribbean to work. More has to be done in the area of financial sector, the service sector. The Caribbean has to open up, and that is the role of the Commonwealth, really bringing everybody together, the smaller islands, and looking at opportunities and across within the Commonwealth family. The Commonwealth cannot compel. They've tagged Commonwealth as a toothless bulldog, but we can compel. We can negotiate. They can create and facilitate investment within the Commonwealth. And that is what we are not doing much about. All this agreement, all this negotiation we did with how many of the private sector, how many of the mainstream in private sector are carried along? Basically none. When we talk about the digital economy, is the private sector, the small and micro scale businesses that should be involved, and they are the one playing in the lead, not the government. Yes, the government creates an enabling environment, the regulatory framework, but the private sector, deliberate efforts should be made to get them involved. It's enough for us to say, yeah, we have done this in the past. How can we get them? They're not even there. But if we make an attempt to get them involved, the chambers of commerce are there. The businesses, we know the major players in Africa, we know the major players in the Caribbean. Create investment deal, not the government coming together, but for the private sector, I emphasize the private sector, because we are left in the open where we don't know what is going on. This agreement takes place. Who implements it? Who ensures that the private sector invests ABC or these opportunities are in these areas? I think more effort has to be, we have to focus more effort in these areas, especially the private sector and the small and medium scale business. I've talked about inclusive trade. Inclusive trade. Where are the numbers? Where are the women? Where are the business women that should be facilitated? How about we organizing trade and investment workshop for women in trade? We know International Trade Center, they are doing their lots, they are doing their best, but Commonwealth itself should take up this opportunity. Yes, AFCFTA is now here with us on African front, but there are still a lot of areas that we need to focus on. And Jenny has mentioned, it's not just the UK. We have Canada as a member, we have New Zealand, we have Australia, we have Nigeria, we have South Africa. Encourage these guys, private sector within these countries, to talk to themselves. Because I will tell you this, most Africans don't know what is going on in Australia. They don't know how the business environment in Australia. The same thing with Canada. But Commonwealth is a platform that can bring us together. And I think we'll be better off for it. Let's focus, let's give ourselves time. Let's be deliberate with it. And we'll get it done. Let's leave, yes, UK is now on its own, but Commonwealth is not about the UK. We have 54 member countries. Yes, it's true, majority are small, but there are still big ones inside that have the wherewithal to support the whole system to make it work for Commonwealth citizens. We have to just make it work.
Can I just say one thing, Akini?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I agree with everything you said except one thing. Is that we have time. We do not have the time. We really do not have the luxury of time. We recently had a CARICOM Commission on the Economy report that came out, and it was called Caribbean 9.58. Now, for any self-respecting Caribbean person, you would know that that's Usain Bolt's 100 meters record at the last Olympics. And the truth is that what the idea was is that we don't have the luxury of waiting. We don't have the luxury of time because the world is just going ahead before us. I want to endorse all you've said about the private sector. And I think in your remarks, you actually expanded it beyond the private sector, because I think one of the realizations in this new economy is that it has to be inclusive. And I think private sector is used to talk about businesses and small enterprises, which are important. But the one thing that really resonated with me is how important other groups, women's groups, disadvantaged groups, persons with disabilities, how much more, they need to be integrated in the thinking as stakeholders, as part of these partnerships moving forward. And I think I love reading the African Agenda for 2063, which is all about women empowerment and young people. I mean, I heard a statistic recently that in the next, I don't know how many ever years, 40% of the world's young people will come from Africa. That is an astounding market. And it's an astounding amount of energy. People who I know who've been to Africa and who work with Africa, the fintech products they're creating, the young people have so many wonderful ideas. And I think, we want to ride that train. And the last thing that I wanted to actually say is that we at the SRC in the Caribbean, we have launched the Africa Caribbean Trade Webinar Series. In fact, the second installment is tomorrow. And the idea behind this is to move the discussion from just talking about trade with Africa and the Caribbean, but also actually learning about each other's regional integration movements. And then the next step would be actually to encourage investments across. We're small. I know African countries think about the Caribbean as small, but we have wonderful ideas. We have 2 Nobel laureates from the Caribbean. We're smart people. We're creative people. We have Bob Marley. We have Usain Bolt. So we have different skill sets, and I think being part of the diaspora, the African diaspora, we could certainly utilize Commonwealth to really buttress some of these ideas that you've mentioned.
Absolutely, I agree with you, Jan. As a matter of fact, we call the Caribbean and the African diaspora as Caribbean as the 6th continent of Africa. So we see the Caribbean as part of us. Basically, we have to do more. That is just the truth. We have to do more. The universities in the Caribbean has to talk more with African Caribbean. The education, the knowledge economy has to speak to themselves. Most times, when you ask an average Africa, what do you know about the Caribbean? They know little or nothing about it. So there should be joint research. There should be joint publication. There should be joint collaboration in webinars and activities and programs. We have to just get it done. So, but we have a platform already that we can ride on. So I'm saying, let's stop making it government discussion. Not even the mainstream, not the Dangotes. There are 1,001 small businesses we can work with and we can ride with. The music industry is amazing. We've never started tapping into it. Where are the technology gurus in the Caribbean? How can they connect to Indians tech gurus? How can they connect to African tech gurus? There are a whole lot we can do on this area. Collabo, music, acting, film industry, infrastructure investment. How many direct flights do we have from the Caribbean to Africa? So you see, we have 19 African countries that are members of Commonwealth. That's what I'm saying. We have 19. The biggest economy in Africa is Nigeria, followed by South Africa. They are members of the Commonwealth. Why can't we use them? Why can't we leverage on them? Yes, we have the small islands, we have the small poorest stuff, even with the poverty rate that's Africa, Nigeria, but we can get it wrong. When we saw some leadership problem here, don't mind us in Nigeria, we'll sort it out. We have some leadership stuff we're going to deal with ourselves. When we deal with it, we take care of the outside. But at the same time, we can't focus on the negativity and allow what we should be doing in the positive arena, just let it slide. We have to get to work. But when I make reference of time, I'm saying, yes, COVID, the aftermath of COVID has not yet been felt because some economy is still under lock. But what we can do, we have the digital platform already, just like this webinar, to speak and to act. Can we open this up? Can we open this up? We can. And the Commonwealth Secretary has a lot to do. And I appeal to the funders again, Australia, Canada, the UK, the voluntary donation is important for the small islands and for the poor countries of the Commonwealth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. On the issue of bringing private sectors to the center of this discussion, I think it's also important to take note of the fact that even in Africa itself, the private sector has been pushed to the periphery. So especially even if you look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, the dispute settlement mechanism, you see that it's only state parties that have the local standing to in that code. So I think it's also important that this all advocacy should also be very strong in Africa itself, so that the private sector can also be included, just not just as a way of diplomatic protection, but them themselves having that rights. The law custody to be in those courts in order to settle their own disputes. Because if anything, it is the private sector that trades and not the government. So thank you very much for bringing that up. And the final question that I have from myself before we take, I saw some questions on the chat room. So to Dr. Vickers, you talked about the modes of services, how they can be supplied. So especially on the fourth part, on the temporary movement of natural persons, how possible is it, especially in a digital area, how in a digital economy, how possible is movement of persons affected? How is that movement affected in a digital economy, especially right now, during and post-pandemic era?
Thanks for that question. Just to come back and also say, I think there is considerable collaboration and cooperation, networking among the private sector in the Commonwealth. Whether it's through these different platforms that I've spoken about, or whether it's intergovernmental. We even have a business-to-business working cluster under the Commonwealth Connectivity Agenda. And if you think about the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, the next one will be in Kigali. There's always a business forum as well. And what Sand and others have said, we not need to think much more creatively going forward, and maybe having like a trade fair or something that goes with heads of government meetings in the future, where you can do practical connecting up between importers and exporters and suppliers. In terms of this mode 4, which is generally when this pertains particularly to the ICT and IT sector, is when you need a really skilled technician to go to another country for a limited period of time to deliver a particular service, and then they will return to their home countries. Often there's a lot of challenges around this because it also requires visas and so forth. What we did see during the pandemic, I think, is also really a question of, do people still need to travel to go and deliver a service? We've increasingly seen that the world of business is changing. Many multinational companies, banks, have said, for instance, that they no longer will be spending large parts of their budgets on travel anymore because of digital platforms, online meetings, virtual engagements. These things can be dealt online. A number of these services increasingly, can also be, dealt online. ICT services, IT support, that there's a whole online industry for this. The emergence of cloud computing and other services linked to digitalization probably also, reduce the need for many, IT technicians to even travel, to deliver services like that going forward. So I think it's really something interesting to watch, is how services are being affected by a more digital world, what is increasingly tradable, and what we need to do to enable trade of particularly e-commerce and goods, but also the online delivery of certain services that happen. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vickers. I saw a question.
Could I just throw in another one? A very interesting debate is also whether the tourism can be delivered through online mode 1. That tourists no longer need to travel to the Caribbean to actually enjoy the experience, but can actually enjoy that sitting in their armchair at home through some kind of an augmented reality. Really interesting. Hopefully not, but more harnessed as a digital, as a marketing strategy to give someone a taste of what they can experience. And to get them to travel in the end. But really interesting where this direction is going, virtual reality and augmented reality. Sorry for jumping in again, but I thought that's really interesting.
Thank you, Dr. Vickers. Dr. Remy, did you want to say something?
No, I was just being cheeky about the idea of the augmented reality experience in the Caribbean. I think if it's a precursor to coming to the Caribbean, it's great, but it can never replace the Caribbean being here in person. That's a free advertisement for the region's tourism sector.
Yeah.
They could try. We can try.
Yeah, I think that is quite interesting. How will I virtually see the Caribbean? I think that's quite it's something that we yet to find out and just see how it goes. But in the meantime, I saw a question in the chat room. Just
we had a few. No, sorry, we had a few comments, Akinyi, but no real questions there. So
Okay.
that being the case, maybe you can give the panelists a chance to give some closing remarks, because I'm looking through just now. I'm just seeing comments that attendees have made, but no one
Yeah, and
has.
I had a hand raised. Sorry, could I?
Oh, sorry. Arif, is that Arif?
Yeah, sorry. I had a hand
Yeah,
raised.
go ahead, Arif. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, just to say thank you very much. Sorry, I was a bit. See, Brendan, this is what happens when you're a PhD student, Brendan. You're constantly looking for reference. So I've always done a sort of submerged you with links and things. I think one of the things that is really, and I mean, Brendan, you did touch upon this in your drivers of trade slide. I think the important opportunity now is, you remember, Brendan, the strapline for the first Commonwealth Trade Review in 2015, the changing landscape for trade. One could argue now it has changed significantly. So the question now is, if that landscape has changed, my daughter is 10 years old today, okay, Anissa. The world is going to look very different for her in 10 years' time, let alone 20 years' time. And those jobs we don't have yet, so I think the way that industries, it's not just Industry 4.0, but I think from a Commonwealth perspective, what does it mean for countries that haven't diversified their export base? What does this moment mean for them? What does it mean for countries that have very young populations, which many of our countries do? What does it mean for countries that, I mean, Brendan, you'll be aware of the recent Commonwealth Secretariat report on infrastructure that came out, which is highlighting that Commonwealth countries could even leapfrog some of the infrastructure challenges because they haven't got the legacy systems they have to deal with. So I think the COVID-19 moment provides us with a really interesting opportunity. But I think one of the missing pieces in this jigsaw is the D word, because I don't think we found a way to crack the code. And I'm referring, and Brendan won't be surprised because he knows that I've got a bit of a project going on with this on the diaspora. And I think the diaspora is very interesting, not just because people always talk about the diaspora, yes, but what's interesting now is Anissa, the diaspora for second, third generation people like that, who these are children that have grown up in a different context and are growing up. Their access to technology at the age of 10 is much higher in terms of their access to digital literacy. Now, it's not universal. There are gaps and challenges. So my question really is, are we really fully prepared for the way that significant changes are taking place with industry? Now, one of the biggest ways to get a window on this is through looking at emerging tech. So if you look at health tech, if you look at ed tech, if you look at fintech, clearly, even fashion tech, these are real areas that are changing. We organized a big event last month with the UK government, Innovate UK, and various other stakeholders, and it was all around women and emerging tech. But what came out of that was the way that these tech sectors, and I think, Jan, be interesting to get your thoughts on this, the way that these tech sectors, they don't have some of the embedded patriarchy that some of the other industry sectors have, because they're still emerging. So my question to you, Brendan, is also, if these industry sectors are still evolving and emerging, particularly linked to technology, what does that mean for inclusion? And Brendan, you'll remember that 90 minutes in the trade ministers meeting. It was the most animated session in the whole 2.5 days, when they all chipped in, and it could have gone on for much longer. It was all on inclusive and sustainable trade. So my question is, what are the implications for the Commonwealth for inclusive and sustainable trade, given all these things that I've been talking about? Does it mean we can do more quickly? Does it mean we need to think about new forms of investment? Does it mean we need to have a major literacy program for our policymakers? Some of you may be aware that next week, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, no less, is organizing a 4-day event on the fourth industrial revolution. It's a kind of masterclass for policymakers in the fourth industrial revolution. So maybe there's work to be done in that area as well. So I'd just be interested in people's, I've given you a lot to digest there, but obviously pick up what you'd like to from any of that. But I just wanted to give you some food for thought and responses. Thank you.
I'm going to take a bite at it. It's a big point, a good point, and I've been looking at your feeds into the chat, Arif, so thank you for that. It gives a lot of information of where we can find more details. The tech sector, I mean, you made one comment. I think it's the wave of the future. I think everybody appreciates that, because in and of itself it adds value, but it also provides new. It's an avenue also, right? So quite apart from an end product, it also allows us to rethink the way we deliver traditional services, including tourism, as I mentioned, or our creative sector, for which the Caribbean, punches way above its weight. Entertainment is our thing in the Caribbean. But also thinking, just last week I had a young mentee of mine say that she crochets a lot, which is, and if she could put her new products on eBay. So I think young people are not constrained in the same way that my generation and older generations kind of think and see the world. And that's a good thing. But I will disagree with you in one small respect, which is that I think it is already captive to the bigger interests. If you think about it, Facebook, as I mentioned before, eBay, Amazon, all of these, even Alibaba, all of these allow you to utilize the platform, but it is at a cost. And also to be able to utilize these platforms, you need interconnectivity, you need broadband, you need electricity. These are some of the problems that countries, we have high connectivity in certain countries. We have people in the Caribbean with over 100% internet penetration or mobile penetration, because a lot of people have 2 phones. But that's the extreme. There are still certain countries in my region that have fall off. Some people couldn't follow this entire webinar because of where they're located. And how do you actually incentivize telecoms communities or telecom businesses to go into these rural communities and provide these services, even if it's at a cost to them? So these are kind of the cybersecurity laws, data protection laws. We don't have a fully functional regional data protection policy, far less legislation that is fully passed in the region. It is a spotty sort of overview. Some areas are doing well, some countries are doing well, others are not. Interconnectivity and telecoms broadband is still expensive in our region. We do not have a roaming policy, so I can go half an hour by flight to St. Vincent or to Jamaica, 2 hours, and I'm paying ridiculous roaming rates. So it's still at the level of the abstract. It's great, it's wonderful, these ideas are there, but we need to get at the deeper problems. The deeper problems are everyday problems that you can't get away from. It's a government intervention, and that's why I started in my remarks on industrial policy. Government has to understand how all these things interconnect. Private sector can have all of the will in the world. If you don't have the enabling environment to make it happen, it's just not going to happen. So I think the promise is great, but the reality will take a lot more work on our side to make sure we have the systems and the infrastructure, as you mentioned, in place to make these new blossoming industries actually happen. And I think these are my parting words. I've used up way too much of my airtime. So thank you for the opportunity, and would love to engage with more people by online, by email.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. San, go ahead. And I think with that, you can also give your parting shot.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know if I should call you Prof. Arif, because looking at your background, I'm like, wow. That is awesome. And I agree with Dr. Remy. We know, and I don't know Commonwealth position on this really. I know now I'm in Nigeria, I can't access Twitter, and my business is suffering. I have to visit US, Canada, Australia. Sometimes I'll go to Lisbon within an hour because I have to use VPN because Nigeria is a Commonwealth country where in the 21st century, we depend on digital technology to be able to grow our business. What is the connection and disconnection of banning a Twitter, a platform where someone like me used to trade just because you felt something is not right? So where's the position of free trade? Where's free speech? Where am I in this whole regulatory discussion as a business person. This is a practical, this is a food for thought. Now we're talking about technology. I have been out, I've been disconnected 2 or 3 times offline because the infrastructure is not strong enough. It's still very, very expensive to use the internet in Nigeria. I lived in UK a number of years. I know I have on the go, I use internet in the office, I use internet at home. I have never experienced any downtime, but I do experience it here. And Nigeria is presumably one of the biggest economy in Africa, and is a Commonwealth member state, even since inception. So how do we address this issue? Yes, regulatory framework is important because government has to meet the environment. If they're not doing it, how do we persuade them? How do we harass their back to do it? That is the question. Yeah, we can go to technology industry 4.0, but we are not even out of 2.0 in Nigeria or in Africa. We're talking about that. This is a practical reality. It's very in Nigeria, you have to have 3 phone SIM card because sometimes the whole 3 might even go offline. You just have to somehow find a way around it. And so these are the issues. Professor Raf, I have to call you Prof. I don't know if you are, but I thank you very much for that resource. I just opened up some of the trades for the Parliament, House of Commons. You know, this is awesome. I think we have to engage you further after this discussion. Trade and Commonwealth, developing countries, fantastic reports. Just browsing through, but this is our pain as private sector. This is our pain as people that are from Africa that are part of Commonwealth. What can Commonwealth do to address this? And that is why. And just to chip in on the area of dispute settlement under AFCFTA. My organization, Africa International Trade and Commerce Business, has been in forefront in promoting inclusiveness under AFCFTA. We've been in forefront. We believe it's a game changer for the content. We believe this is one of the agreements, outside every agreement, that is going to empower private sector. But when it empowers private sector and I have dispute with a man that refuses to supply me my 20-feet container, do I have to go and meet civil servant to mediate on my behalf? I think we have to just review that law. Review that aspect. And thank goodness, negotiation is ongoing. It doesn't have to be state party. It has to be, there should be a special court for this, where I can bring my case, where this small business can bring their case, where the woman, farmer or cross-border trader can bring his or her case when he feels he's not being held or he has been shortchanged. And these are ongoing concerns, and we must start dealing with it from now. And it's a whole lot, but I pity Commonwealth Secretariat. This is taking all this on board at the multilateral level. But hey, that is why the Commonwealth is here. Hey, that is why AFCFTA Secretary is here. Hey, maybe that's why the UK has to continue playing leadership role in all this, because somehow they just have to play the game. They just have to play that leadership role because it is their responsibility. So my closing remark is this. We are now in an interesting time where everyone is somehow struggling to come out of it. So somehow we should not be crab. Crabs want to pull everything down. We should be builders, supporting one another, encouraging ourselves, especially within the Commonwealth, how to leverage that network, our friendship, for the good of everyone. The vaccine is here. There's a lot of conspiracy behind the vaccine. However, businesses are shutting down because of the COVID. So somehow there should be a voice that goes out of hope, of encouragement, of innovation, of saying, yes, we have the challenge, but we can overcome it. We are human. Humanity should come first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fan Bakalu. Just before I give it to Dr. Vickers to give his final remarks, and that will be the end. I just want to give you some response, especially on the issue that you raised on trying to establish an African commercial port. I think I'm currently writing an article on the same, And it's a whole debate on that, because if anything, African states have data has it that African states do not litigate against one another. So how different is it going to be with this African Commercial Code? So it's a whole debate on the same, and I think I'll be interested in also having that discussion with you later on. But thank you very much for that insightful for those insightful remarks. And finally, I give it to, I saw there was Masoni who wanted to give his or her comment, but due to time, I'm sorry, we're not able to take that. So Dr. Vickers, over to you.
Thank you. Just in response to Arif, I think Arif will have to have a beer to discuss all these issues. But generally, I think what we are seeing is that the pandemic has really accelerated the digitalization of economy, society, the world of work. But at the same time, my concern is that it's also exacerbated the digital divide. You're increasingly going to have a world of digital leaders and digital followers. So very much what San said, while we here in the UK on 5G, we're very digitally advanced, and that's the bold and prosperous future, hopefully for your daughter. For many in the world, that's a future they can only aspire to. And we're going to have to tackle that by I guess just tackling the basics. Whether it's the infrastructure, the access just to a mobile handset. The cost of those are exorbitant. The cost of data, the infrastructure. Even in Africa, the African Union Commission overall has estimated a infrastructure funding gap annually of 60 to 90 billion. So these are the kinds of things you need to get right to, get to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area at least, and to get people connected and trading with each other. But even if you look at one of the things we touched in our report was the UNCTAD's readiness for frontier technologies, a really interesting index to show who's ready for not just Industry 4.0, but all that comes with that. And obviously the developed countries lead the pack there, and developing countries are way behind, and really challenging to be able to catch up in that way. So yeah, a lot of work is required there, but I think it's just down to the basics in the end, the infrastructure, the access, the skills, the literacy, and enabling people in that regard. Just final word, last week was the Commonwealth Secretariat's 56th birthday. So I think we've come a very far way, and we look forward to another 56 years where we can work together, and hopefully Jan, Sand, and maybe we'll still be around, and we can take stock of where we are. So thank you so much. It was a great pleasure being with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our participants and to our panelists for making this day a success. And I'm not sure if David Gomez is here.
I'm still here, so yes. So
you'll put this up on your YouTube later, David, as usual, will you?
yes, I will. Well, it's being simulcast on YouTube now, and then I'll make the video available up on the.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing I would say to all of you. All of us actually have a responsibility to take these kind of conversations into our universities. So even this session, David, would be a great teaching resource right across the Commonwealth, just for people to listen to this conversation and follow up, because I think that's something. Anyway, I would add to that. Thank you very much. Thanks. Great session.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And perhaps, David, you could give us some vote of thanks.
That's putting me on the spot. I mean, I think I was rather impressed by the quality of the discussion. I know there's been quite a lot of talk about what do countries do now in this post-Brexit, post-COVID, new international environment. And I think particularly as the small island states are getting pushed towards considering or migrating towards green economies, which is hugely challenging for them. I think it's important for the issues that were raised in the discussion today to be ventilated a lot more at regional levels, also at the Commonwealth level. But I have to thank the three panelists for pointing out that there are opportunities that can work. I happen to think that a lot more of what Yaniv and the Shoot at Ramphal Center are doing in terms of creating regional linkages and exploring the issue from that perspective and at that level. I think more of that needs to happen, because it is within that framework that you will drive the types of business connectivity that would make that Commonwealth objective of growing trade to that intra-Commonwealth trade to that 2 trillion level. That is where you'll realize a lot of that growth. So far, I think a lot of trade has happened kind of through a conduit. So it goes up through the Europe and the UK and comes back down or up in the other way. Now there's an opportunity to make those connections latitudinally, so going across each other. But let me thank you, Yaniv, for joining us today and for your comments. Brendan, thank you so very much, and San. We now know how to say your last name, San. So Akinyi and I were struggling to do it for about 5 minutes before you joined us. So guys, thank you all very much. This has been a wonderful start to our 3-part webinar series, which is actually the brainchild of Akinyi, who is a researcher with us here at the Ramphal Institute. I know I prevented some of you from seeing the England versus Germany game, but I would like to say that the good games actually played yesterday, so no need to fret over what happens in the matches today. So thank you all very much. Have a nice evening, and bless everyone. So.
You're lucky it wasn't cricket, David. It's a civil war over here or something.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great session.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.